ได้ยินนะครับ
ได้ยินชัดค่ะ ตอนนี้เรามีท่านผู้ฟังเข้ามาสักพักแล้วนะคะ เดี๋ยวรอให้ถึงเวลาแล้วเดี๋ยวเราจะเริ่มกันเลยนะคะ
ได้
ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
แล้วตอนเริ่มเนี่ยคุณเบสใช่ไหมครับคุณเบส
ใช่ใช่ค่ะ
ก็เดี๋ยวก็ให้คุณเทสก็นำเสนอไปเรื่อยๆใช่ไหมก็พอตอนจบก็จะมีเป็น question answers แล้วก็ถามตอบ30 นาที
ใช่ค่ะค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะท่านแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านค่ะวันนี้เราก็มาพบกันอีกแล้วนะคะกับงานเว็บวีนาจาก DITP ค่ะกิจกรรมดีๆแบบนี้เกิดขึ้นมาแล้วค่ะวันนี้เป็นวันที่3ของกิจกรรมนะคะค่ะและดิฉันค่ะเบ็ตตี้ค่ะเบ็ตตี้น่าชูสุขค่ะกิจกรรมของเราเป็นสัมมนาออนไลน์ที่มีชื่อว่า DITP Overseas เปิดโอกาสตลาดใหม่และสร้างความมั่นใจตลาดเดิมงานของเราจัดขึ้นค่ะระหว่างวันที่17-19 สิงหาคมพุทธศักราช2564นะคะกิจกรรมนี้จัดขึ้นโดยสำนักพัฒนาตลาดและธุรกิจไทยในต่างประเทศ2กรมส่งเสริมการค้าระหว่างประเทศกระทรวงพาณิชย์ค่ะโดยทั้ง3วันนี้ค่ะทุกท่านจะได้รับทราบข้อมูลการค้าเชิงลึกที่น่าสนใจไม่ว่าจะเป็นข้อมูลตลาดรายประเทศหรือสินค้าดาวรุ่งในภูมิภาคอเมริกาลาตินอเมริกาภูมิภาคยุโรปและ CIS และภูมิภาคแอฟริกาและตะวันออกกลางค่ะสำหรับงานสัมมนาแต่ละวันนะคะเราจัดขึ้นทั้งสิ้น4หัวข้อค่ะและ4หัวข้อสำหรับวันนี้ค่ะได้แก่หัวข้อโอกาสตลาดสินค้าในแคนาดาหัวข้อที่2ค่ะ Mexico an attractive market for food industry หัวข้อที่3ค่ะ Africa land of opportunity tips and tricks you need to know และหัวข้อสุดท้ายค่ะช่องทางการส่งออกสินค้าอาหารไทยไปยังแอฟริกาใต้ค่ะ Ladies and gentlemen, now without further ado, we would like to turn the time over Mr. Ted Takounseun, the Vice President of TI Food. Please welcome for the presentation of โอกาสสินค้าในตลาดแคนาดา Over to you, sir.
Sawadee krap, everyone. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Kunbat, for the lovely introduction. Thank you as well for the DITP for the opportunity to present our Canadian market to everyone, and also a special thank you to Kun Tanikrit and the DITP Toronto team for inviting me here. So when I was first asked to do this, I was actually quite nervous because number one, I don't think I've ever done a Zoom meeting with so many people before. Usually it's maybe 3, 4, 5 people, but this is quite a bit of people. So thank you again for the interest in this presentation. And number two, I just want to make sure that I add some value to whatever it is that everyone is doing. And hopefully we can highlight some of the good points and some more of the difficult points about marketing and selling in Canada. So unfortunately, I didn't understand the intro from Kunbet, but just a little brief intro for me. I'm really a lover of food. I like eating food. You can't really see from the bottom half, but I do. I like selling food, and I've been doing so for most of my career, and all of it being in Canada. So I've had some experience with launching new brands, and also had some experience revitalizing some brands that may have needed some improvement. So today, really, we're just going to take you through what we usually go through with some prospective vendors that are interested to penetrate into Canada. And this is really a high-level guideline. It's very difficult, I think, to fit all the different details into an hour presentation. So please take it as a guideline, and things change, but not as a manual. So the reason why I chose this title, Canada as the Gateway to North America, is really when people think about North America, they think about our big brother to the south. So they're a very prominent country, and they have a very large population. And when people think about business, most people think about the larger areas. Hopefully, we can show today why Canada might be a good stepping stone to get into North America, and also it could be the place where a brand can start being marketed in North America, first in Canada, and possibly to the US afterwards. Sorry, next page. Yeah, so this is just the brief agenda. There is quite a bit of information today, so we're going to start off with some demographic information. So who is in Canada, and later on we would probably go on to say who is a target for various brands or products that you're planning to penetrate here. We'll give a small snapshot into the Canadian grocery industry, some example players for brick and mortar as well as digital. go-to-market strategy. So how do we get the products into the hands of those target consumers? Some unique Canadian packaging and regulations. So Canada is similar to the US in many ways, but again, we are somewhat different. So we will get into some of the more specific things that would need to be done to start selling in Canada that you might not need to do for the US. Last but not least, some consumer trends. So this part will be constantly changing, especially with the ebb and flow for COVID. So we try our best to give a snapshot as of today, what we think may happen for our market here. And at the end, because there's so much information, we'll put it all together and hopefully have some of it resonate a bit more with everyone on the seminar today. So when we start with any type of selling, I think we would probably need to know what is the size of the opportunity, right? Although we might not be able to target the whole pie, we need to know what the size of the pie is and what part of that pie we want to do. So it's really dependent on the brand or the category that you're going to be in. But again, just to showcase Canada a bit more, we've compiled some demographic information. So surprisingly to many Canadians, actually pre-COVID, we had the highest growth rate in terms of all the G7 nations. And why that's important to note is because we are pretty much a mature country already, right? For us to be growing at the fastest rate is actually quite impressive. So as of 2020, our July 2020, our total population is 38 million. So even though COVID hit during that time, we still saw a 1.1% growth. And again, that's for us, that's quite impressive. And it's important for us to keep growing because we need to keep adding to our GDP. And, you know, unfortunately for Canadians, and I think it's very similar all around the world, the natural birth rate is actually on a decline, or at least at a plateau. So our population is aging, our workforce is aging. So the government has made a commitment to bring in about 400,000 or 500,000 pre-COVID immigrants per year, and that's to displace the aging workforce and to bring in skilled and educated workers. So I think it's a good thing for Canada. So we will, the Canadian population will continue to grow, and we usually section off the country into 3 areas. We have a large landmass, and so I'm not sure if you can see here or not, but the leftmost side from BC, so B.C. to MAN, that's what we consider Western Canada. That has about 1/3 of the Canadian population. Ontario by itself, OMT dot, is 1/3 of the Canadian population, and then QUE, which is Quebec and east of there, has about 1/3 of the population. So that's important to note later on when we talk about the go-to-market strategy, because we have Canada logistically, I think, is more of a challenge than other parts of the world because of how big the country is and how small our population is. So the top chart here really just shows the drop off in immigration during COVID. But once COVID is over, and hopefully it's soon, we will for sure see the population go up again. And it's again, the government policies have made it very easy for immigrants that want to come here to come here. So we weren't affected very much by COVID in terms of losing population, even though many people had passed away, but because they weren't a large percentage of our population at that time anyway, we didn't really experience a decline in population. So again, the lower birth rate really is offset by immigration, and over 80% of our population growth is coming from immigration from overseas. So in this slide here, we can see that the more red the country is, that's where more of the immigrants are coming into Canada. And on the right-hand side, you can see the various countries with the most immigrants coming in. So most notably Philippines, India, China. I'd like to note, though, I think for the purpose of our seminar today, I don't think the stats picked up, Chinese Taiwan or Chinese Hong Kong or Chinese Macau, and also possibly, Chinese coming in from India or the UK. So we do have a sizable Chinese population here. Unfortunately, not a large Thai population. I think it's because of the weather. But we do have also a large Philippine and a growing and a large Philippine population, and a growing and large Indian population. So one note that Canada is a bit different than the US is how we view immigrants. I think the US is more of a melting pot versus where Canada is multicultural. So the difference between those words is melting pot to me sounds like people from all over the world coming together and sort of assimilating. So melting together to create a new culture, right? Which is the American culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, America does a lot of good things. But in Canada, what we embrace is the multiculturalism. So that means that we very much embrace everyone's culture, and we respect that culture and try to make it a part of Canada without losing that original culture from the country that you come from. So when it comes to food marketing, as we get into later on, it's an important point to keep in mind. So a bit more census data, and again, it's just by languages spoken at home. So it's actually surprising that you can see orange, which is Tagalog, which is the language of the Philippines, being so prevalent in the middle countries. So in the middle provinces. Those provinces are predominantly oil-based, farm-based, commodity-based provinces. So they provide skilled labor to obtain those natural resources. Ontario being Mandarin Chinese, I think makes sense. And let's say for Quebec and New Brunswick, which is more Arabic, makes sense because those areas are French. The official language in Quebec is French, and there are a lot of Arabic countries which were French colonies that do speak French currently. So for the spend of general Canadians, this is not specific to any ethnic group, but I would assume that, for all general Canadians, including all ethnic groups, food is the number 2 spend. That makes lots of sense, right? Because first you need a place to live, and then second you need some stuff to eat. I think Canada, though, is a bit different from USA and maybe some other countries, only because the shelter costs are actually disproportionately high, especially over the last few years. With the large number of immigrants coming in, there's a large demand for shelter. So real estate for us has gone really haywire. Property prices are up, rental prices are up. So I would assume that the shelter percentages have crept up over the years, which leaves less spend on other categories. For food, everyone needs to eat. I think it just depends on what they eat, right? So there's expensive stuff like beef and meats and lamb and duck, but there's also less expensive stuff like bread or greens or rice. And I think we're seeing that it's either go price driven or splurge, and then we'll talk about that a little bit more on the consumer trends. But it's good to know that back to the immigrant story, that the longer the immigrants are here, the more money they make. You know, everyone's coming to a new country to have a better life, so they work harder. They might educate themselves more. They will probably better their language skills, or their English or their French, to be able to command a better salary. And so that's why their salary would go up. And with that salary increase, then their spend on certain things will increase. And again, if you talk about food, so instead of maybe having you know, some simple meal, they may be able to make more elaborate meals and use more elaborate ingredients to enjoy with their new salary. The rightmost slide here basically is just showing that at the early onset of immigration, everyone would want to move to the big cities. So big cities for us is Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. But as it gets more expensive and more competitive to find good paying jobs there, a lot of people have chosen to settle in other parts of the country. And we can see that very obviously just by seeing how well certain items sell in stores that are not in the big cities. And so I think that's a very good thing for us as people trying to sell products, because we're not reliant on just one region anymore, and we have the opportunity to not only sell to those immigrants moving to other parts of the country, but also rely on their influence on their peers to introduce these new flavors to them. So the way we tier our target audience is we have 3 tiers, and it's a pyramid because the topmost one has the least amount of people, and then the bottom part, tier 3, would have the most amount of people. So tier 1 we would categorize as recent immigrants. So they would most likely do the most authentic type of cooking, and they would use the most authentic type of ingredients. So an example is during the 1980s, when there were a lot of Vietnamese immigrants here in Canada, you know, the fish sauces and whatnot sold really, really well. Well, now those people who came in the 80s are older now, and they have children. And the children, which we have categorized as tier 2, still love the taste, but they may not have the same frequency usage, or they might not even have the know-how, you know. So for me, I'm 100 times worse cook than my mom because I don't know how to use all the ingredients. And so then the demand of the items that I use will change, right? And these are good changes. They're not bad changes. It's just that as an exporter or as a factory or as a marketer, we have to recognize these changes to be able to find products that would, you know, grow along with the evolution of these immigrants. You know, even in tier 2, I've included the circle of friends of the children of those first generation immigrants, because they have so much exposure to it that they are also have the same taste buds and the same usage needs as myself. So I remember when I was very young, we used to have some Canadian kids come over for dinner, and my mom would cook something, and then, you know, they would only eat rice because that's all they knew, and they didn't dare to eat anything else, which I found very odd, and I didn't understand that at that time. But, you know, as we got older and had people coming, then you know, they start eating a lot of different things. So I see those as tier 2, and the tier 3 would be the general Canadians. This is the general population. It's a huge population. So then what items, or how can we market it to them if that is indeed your target audience, right? So I always like to talk about the immigrants, because I find that they are the most accepting to the products out of Thailand or out of any any country in Asia. So just to summarize why Canada could be a good starting point. So, you know, more immigrants, it's a growing population, and the growing population is likely familiar with the items that you're manufacturing. With so many immigrants, we are more open to worldwide trends. So again, the friends or the co-workers that you work with, even though you didn't know possibly what tamarind was, well, now you do, because, you know, your co-worker, your friend, or your kids' friends have explained it to them. And with that, it comes a more open mind and more general acceptance of international products. So it could either be a new flavor, I already used tamarind, so let's say tom yum, right? It's a unique flavor to Thailand. So, for a lot of people who haven't been to Thailand, their only exposure is maybe from their Thai friends or going to a Thai restaurant. And because there's more international people in that city or in the country, it just keeps their mind open. And the other way to look at it is maybe it's the same product that we have here in Canada, but it's really just different origin. So I have a feeling that so chicken wings and beer are a very big industry here in Canada, because everyone eats and drinks beer with watching hockey games or basketball games. But I can guarantee you, I don't think over 10% of them know that a lot of the chicken wings that they might be eating could be from Thailand. Which I know that Thailand is a big exporter, or a larger exporter of chicken to Canada. So those are different ways to look at it. Last but not least, our population is 38 million. I believe that's probably the size of California state, right? So the population of USA, I think, is like 360 million, and California might be 38 or 40 million. So our total population is the same as California, but it's growing. And with a smaller population, I think the investment risk might be lower. But we'll get into that a bit more in the other slides. So at this time, I'll speak a little bit about the Canadian grocery industry. There are a lot of players, and the names that I'm giving here aren't necessarily the best or the ones I recommend. It's really ones that I just wanted to comment on because of some special things that they've been doing with Thai or with Asian and international items. So we'll get into that. So we're only focusing on retail today. Food service is a whole different beast. But for the retail industry, the channels are segmented, I think very similar to other countries. So, on the left-hand side, we have there the mainstream channel. And mainstream, I mean that these are, I guess, modern trade. I think that's the term that is used in Asia. So the modern trade, and under the modern trade, there's mass merchants, there's club stores, there's conventional, there's hard discount. So an example of a mass merchandiser or a hypermarket, I think that's more, a mass merchandiser. It might be a North American term, but it's more like a hypermarket where they sell grocery and they sell general merchandise. You have a club store, which is like Costco, right? Conventional is like a grocery only. They only sell food. They have lots of assortment. So I think it's more close to Big C, I think. So I might be wrong, but they only sell food. They only sell food at conventional at a higher margin. And then there's hard discount. So hard discount is a very value-driven type of format where they concentrate on volume and low prices. I think I wouldn't say unique to Canada, but for the population size that we have, I do think that we have a over sophisticated ethnic retail market. So why I say it's over sophisticated is because just based on the number of people that we have, there's some very good things that these ethnic supermarkets have done to grow their business and to attract not just Asian people, but the tier 3 or more tier 2 and more tier 3 consumers. So we would segment those into small format, large format, multi-ethnic. So small format, these are more like your mom and pop shops. I don't want to say it's like a wet market, but it's less than 10,000 square feet. And they carry mostly foods and very specialized foods. The large format are stores that are about 40 to 50,000 square feet. They offer, they offer food, but they also offer what we call home meal replacements. So they offer hot food. So they have like a few different options for people to go there and go right after work or go for lunch, and they scoop it in and they bring it home to eat, and it's hot. They don't need to reheat it. They don't need to cook it. And some of them while the parents go to shop. And the last but not least is the multi-ethnic. So it's something that I think is a very great concept. These are large format ethnic stores, so they're owned by Asian people, but then they specifically target not just Asian people. So the offering that they have, the products in their stores, they might have products from South Asia, from Philippines, from Thailand, from Mexico, so from all over the world, so that because Canada is such a diverse population, the areas that they have their stores might have those demographics around them. But if they just cater to Asian people, it's not enough people to keep their business afloat. And so they had to adapt to the surroundings, the demographics in their surroundings. And that's where the multi-ethnic stores have come about, which I'll go into, again, a bit more detail in the next few slides. So we're going to come back to the mainstream and just showcase a bit on the various companies here in Canada. And this is just mainstream. So in total, Canada's retail sales for food is almost $100 billion, 100 billion Canadian dollars. So when we did this research, I think it was maybe 13 years ago, I think it was 80 billion. So we've grown 20 billion in a span of 10 plus years, which I think is not bad. That's led by more people, more consumption, and unfortunately higher prices, right? Canada has only a few major mainstream supermarkets, and why I note that's important. Why I note the importance of that is because retailers have very short memories. So if you do something wrong once, they remember forever. But you have to do a lot of good things many times for them to hopefully remember. And so, mistakes are a lot more pronounced here, as opposed to the US. They are very regional based because their population is so big. So in a certain region, you might have a strong player, but unless you're like Whole Foods or Wegmans or Walmart or Costco, I think it's very rare in the US that a retailer has nationwide distribution. So on here, you can see that, some of the companies have large market share, and these are usually the companies that have retail stores across the country from east to west coast. So we'll get into a few examples for the retailers. And again, I'm not favoring anyone. I'm just giving some examples, and only because there are some unique things that they have done. So we'll start with brick and mortar. So Loblaws, as you may have seen, was the top grocer here. They operate many banners. So banners are sub-brands under their larger brand that they market themselves under. And each banner, for various reasons, it might be because they bought it over and they didn't want to change the consumer's mind, they kept those names, and it seems to work well for them because they're able to target different market segments with the different banners. If you can notice, the no-frill stores, the Real Canadian Superstores, these are the ones that are carry more of the internationally produced items, and they focus more on value. And the main reason why I brought this company up is because of T&T Supermarket. So T&T Supermarket, it was the largest ethnic grocery chain in Canada, who was bought by Loblaws a few years back. And so why they did such a good job is, I think, not only were they able to capture the Asian market, but they were able to make their stores, they were the first Asian store to attract the mainstream consumer, because they kept everything clean, they kept the smells to a minimum, they made the aisles very similar to what the mainstream supermarkets look like, and they did a great job. Right now they have about 28 stores here in all of Canada, and total sales are approximately $620 million. So Loblaws is a very good example of them seeing the trends ahead, like the immigration trends, the food trends, and then filling in their portfolio to target to that growing demographic. Second largest grocery chain here in Canada is Sobeys, and Sobeys also operates under a few different banners, and again to target different demographic. But the main reason, again, that I chose to speak about them is because of their Freshco banner, and then their Chalo Freshco banner. So Freshco is a hard discount, which means they focus on value. I don't want to say price, but I mean it is price driven, but they focus on value. And they focus on volume, so that's why you see that their sales are actually quite high per store. But the Freshco banner that you see on the right there carries a lot of international items from Thailand, from all parts of Asia, and because again they see the trend of the South Asian demographic growing, they actually converted some of their Freshcos to Chalo Freshco, which is a highly focused on that South Asian market. Why I keep talking about Philippines and South Asia and China or Chinese is because I believe that products from Thailand fit those demographic, right? And I mean, they fit any demographic depending on what item it is, but if you're talking about very niche items. Sorry, you shouldn't even use the word niche. I always like to use the example, let's say coconut, right? Coconut along the equator, all the countries have coconut. So everyone knows what a coconut is, regardless if you're from Sri Lanka or you're from Thailand or from Mexico, or sorry, from the Caribbean. You know what that is. Tamarind is the same thing, right? All around the equator in the hotter countries, everyone knows what it is. So those items come from Thailand, and those can be marketed to a bigger population than I think just for the Thai people or just for the Asian people. It can really span more people to target those items too. Last but not least, this group is called the Oceans Fresh Group. Again, this is I think the fullest evolution of the multi-ethnic store. They have successfully changed their stores from targeting just Asian. So in the top left, you can see those the Chinese words. Those were very Asian neighborhoods that they opened that store in. But because of the let's call it the city migration, immigrants come in, they make more money, they move out of certain areas and they go to better areas. Then a new type of immigrant comes in, and so they have to change. And so they've learned to change so that they could target all these different types of nationalities. And they've evolved so far. That now they have stores in like more mainstream malls. They have hot food sections that not just serve Asian food, but they serve Caribbean food. They serve Mexican food, and then their sales aren't low. So these are up and coming players that we see them doing things that are really good and really innovative and adapting to the constantly changing environment. So we're hoping actually they can expand these formats a bit more. So next section, we'll talk about the online retailers. I think e-commerce in Canada is actually quite underdeveloped. We are actually quite slow, I think, in terms of adopting to e-commerce. COVID has definitely sped that up. But as you will see, unfortunately, not so much for food, but I think for other categories of items. And one of the barriers, I think, for e-commerce in Canada is, again, the logistics. It's quite expensive to ship from place to place, especially because the population is so spread far apart. But based on our research, there are a lot more e-commerce or online retailers, but these are the top 5, right? So I think everyone is familiar with Amazon, everyone's familiar with Walmart and Costco. So you notice that, Walmart and Costco did not show up on one of the larger retailer brick and mortar, but they are showing up as online. So I think our conclusion is most likely because they already had the infrastructure set up in various parts of the world, including the US, it was a lot easier for them to port that infrastructure up, even though logistically it's still a bigger challenge. But during COVID, when they ported it up, it really helped because they were already set up. It helped their online sales. Whereas, the Canadian stores, they did not have a full infrastructure and used the time during COVID to start that e-commerce strategy. So that's why there's the little lag, and likely why none of the Canadian grocery stores except for IGA showed up here. And the other one is called HelloFresh. So HelloFresh, although it's not theoretically a retailer, it did show up on the chart, so I decided to keep this in anyway. It's a meal delivery service company. So basically, they will prep all the ingredients, they will give you the recipe, but they'll send it to you at your option every day, every other day, or every week, so that you don't need to think about what to cook. They have the recipe cards, and then they have all the ingredients there. All you need to do is cook it, right? Like you don't have to do it from scratch. And so I think they've been very aggressive in their marketing campaign, and have a lot of sales, although I don't know how they are doing profit wise. So the next slide is showing the progression of e-commerce sales. So the blue bars are e-commerce sales for all categories. So you can see that it's been growing, and it's forecasted to grow even higher. The highlighted percentages are actually the percentage of food sales. So it's still quite low. The good thing is it's growing nominally, but it's still quite low. I think that, people buy groceries online mainly for convenience, right? During COVID, it was safe. And, for some, they might do aggressive online e-commerce campaign and the price is better. But there's likely an issue why the food sales have not been growing. It could be quality, it could be it's actually, you think it's convenient, but it's not, because by the time the groceries arrive at your door, you might not be home. And so there's a lot of logistical issues that still needed to be ironed out. And COVID was the ultimate test, right? You had to do a large volume of food delivery in a very short time and learn from those mistakes in a very short time. So I would expect that the food sales should increase a bit more, but until grocers or e-commerce grocers figure out how to have the service levels better, I think that's the only barrier to keep it from going further. And on the other hand, it's like meats and produce and fruits, right? Most people, I think, it just might be the Canadian in me, I still like going to the store to see it, right? It's very difficult to trust that when you're ordering it online, the produce coming will be the best ones. And once if they screw up once, then you're likely not going to give them another chance, and you'd rather go to the store yourself to pick it out. So there's still some challenges here for the online food sales. The base is low, the growth rate is still low, but hopefully it does pick up later on. So this survey this survey was done in 2020 at the outset of the pandemic. So for us, this was probably stage 1. So this was last year, July. And at that time, when people were surveyed, they were very optimistic about changing their buying patterns from brick and mortar to online. So you can see a lot of negative, a large double-digit negative in the in-store, and some double-digit, but at least some positive in the online. for some reason that's changed, right? The results aren't reflecting what that intention was. And so again, if we look at groceries specifically, because I think all the other categories are fine, pending let's say for clothing, pending the retailer's return policy. But it seems that, the intention was to buy more, but for some reason, then that wasn't the case. Yeah. So to summarize, the brick and mortar is still the majority of the market, right? To come into Canada and not do brick and mortar, I think that would be difficult. But we'll cover some of the options later on. Digital is moving, yeah, but not as fast. And which consumer are you targeting, and where are they more likely to shop? So I'm not saying that a sole digital e-commerce strategy does not work. It really just depends on the type of item that you have. So go-to-market strategy. So I think we talked about the who. So who is the consumer we're targeting with the demographic information, and then we talked about where. So where should you be to be able to sell to those customers? And now we should talk about how. So how do we get the products to those places so that the consumers can buy them? So unless you're going to do your own online retail store, you still need to rely on retailers to get your product to market. So hopefully by now you have a good sense of what Canada looks like. I know I think I had 2 other maps already, so hopefully that's imprinted. But this is a population density map, which shows that the darker the color, the more people there are in that area. So as you can see, most of our population is very close to the U.S. border, right? Historically, Canada and U.S. have been very good partners, and I think that that's the main reason why. It's just a case of being where the business or where the money is, and that's why we're so close to the U.S. The other factor, more than likely, is the weather. So anything north of those colors, then it gets pretty cold there. So I think not a lot of people would be able to take that type of extreme weather. So the land mass is Canada's strength and Canada's weakness. Why it's our strength is because that's where most of the natural resources are. And as you know, Canada is a very big natural resource country. But why it's a weakness is for us trying to sell stuff and try to get the products to where we want it to be. It's a high cost, right? And there's no other way around it. The other issue for Canada is that, again, we are almost 3 different countries. And in this part, I think it might be somewhat similar to the US. So you have the West Coast, different lifestyle, right? The joke in Canada is that, people in the West Coast, they live to play. Yeah, they work to play. No, they live to play, but people in the East Coast live to work. So there's a different mentality there, and the different types of spending. Then we have Quebec, which is a different province altogether, and most of the people, or more than 50% of the people in Quebec, speak French only. And so those are also challenges on how to get the product to the market. So the following are just, live examples of models that we've seen and that we've used, or we've seen factories or exporters use. The first one is, brick and mortar. So we're still talking about brick and mortar, and it's going direct to the retailer, right? So when we display our products at Tyfex, buyers from all over the world come around, and Thailand always has good products, so I'm sure you get a lot of inquiries. By going direct to the retailer, there's a lot of good. So if you do land the deal, you get good initial volume. So let's say, for instance, one of the customers that I showed before comes to you and says, yeah, I'm going to put you into 200 stores. And so they place an order right away, and it's a good initial volume. It's also a quick launch. So the turnaround time, provided you do all the labeling and other regulations correctly, you can turn it around very quickly, especially if they're really interested. And it's a low administration. So basically, you don't have to deal, when you sell to them, you just quote them a price one time, and you don't have to worry about it afterwards, right? Depending on your preference. And but some of the bad parts is the chance to success is relatively low, because they I don't think the retailers would list new items direct from manufacturers very often. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but if you're one of the lucky ones, then that's great. But for, I think, 90% of the people, it's actually quite low chance for success. If you do have a great product, there's a risk that the retailer, after it sells well, to come out with a competing OEM cheaper but lower quality item, right? So it's not a sustainable solution. And the retailers, they're large customers. So if you think about someone like Walmart, they have stores worldwide. They're going to use that leverage to make sure that they win out at the end. And I think for manufacturers, it's a challenge to face that type of leverage from a large customer like that. And last but not least, it's a lower market coverage only because you're only covering one customer. But again, depending on your strategy, if you're okay with that, that's not a bad thing. But if your strategy is to get 70% market coverage, then you're going to need more than one retailer to achieve that. So the next one is brick and mortar, and working with a partner. So either a distributor, importer, or a marketing company. So the bad points is by going through a middle person, you might make less margin, right? Number two, is actually very hard to find good partners out nowadays, and I hear that a lot from various manufacturers. You have to find a partner that I think you can trust to put their best effort into your line. You have to find a partner that looks after the brand as their own, although it's yours, right? But working through another party, working through another layer, you actually have less control, right? But I think with good partners, you would probably come up with a joint plan together to be able to penetrate into the market on a aligned strategy, not one person do one thing and another person do another thing. The pros using a partner, wider coverage, because the partner that you choose should have multiple points of distribution, flexible administration. So it's really up to you how much you want to put into the relationship, so you can control everything from the pricing to the marketing spend to how what percentage coverage you want, or you can just say, I'm just selling you the product and you guys do your best to get the most market coverage or whatnot. And then you also have some advice or information on the market where you don't have to start from scratch to do the research and go through some learning curve, right? Because most likely that partner would have done the learning curve already, or had the learning curve already. And what we're seeing more and more that we're getting, my current position is getting approached about is, a purely digital play. Yeah. So, for a brand owner or an exporter or a manufacturer, when you put your stuff on Amazon, you have direct control. You have direct control and absolute control of how to sell your product. You control the price. You control, what items go on there. You have control on what items that could be recommended for those main items that you're selling. And it's very easy. It's easy to set up an account on Amazon, right? You just need a email, set it up. You might have to pay like a $30 Canadian fee per month. to keep your listing there. And again, flexible results. You can do as little or as much as you want. If you want to do more, then you have to do a bit more on the marketing end, driving traffic to the Amazon store or your own website. Definitely there's some not so good things, right? So as we mentioned, the volume is still relatively low. So and I'm not saying that's for all cases. Maybe someone has a really good product and it's a high velocity one. If you do, that's great. But I think that's the exception rather than the norm at this time. So for volume, especially for food, is still low. It's a very difficult logistics cost. So if you don't have an assortment of items to send, you're only sending a bag or you're sending a can, or even if you're sending a case, to ship from Toronto to Vancouver is going to cost you a lot. And so it may not make it feasible that you do a digital only solution. So again, there's some companies that I've been speaking to that only want to do this and they only want us to do the fulfillment part for them. But it's something that I think is very difficult to do even with our logistics infrastructure, only because the volume is so low. And it's a virtual shelf, so it's infinite, which means there can be a bunch of different items on there, and it's very difficult to have it stand out, and you're gonna have to use a lot of marketing dollars to make your product stand out. So in summary, for the go-to-market strategy, again, this one is quite dependent on your own strategy, right? What you want out of it, and how much of the return you want to see. But brick and mortar, still, again, you have to be there. It's the best coverage for the brand or for the item that you're doing. The same conclusion as before. Digital is up and coming, right? But it's not impactful yet. Not to say that it can't get there, but it's going to be a lot more work, especially finding the right logistics solutions. You might have to lose a bunch of money first just to fulfill before you make money to as a purely digital brand. And the best balance between all of those is probably to find a partner who can do the brick and mortar and possibly even do the digital for you. So now we have to talk about the what. So the product specifically, there are some unique regulations that Canada has, and when we do talk to CFIA, which is the equivalent of the FDA for Canada, we always say that why can't you guys unify your regulations? Because it makes things a lot simpler from a cost wise. So I guess there are political reasons why they cannot unify that, since we're a different country. Thai manufacturers are very good at producing and very good at following regulations. I think the only hurdle that you have when you want to sell to Canada is knowing what regulations and what to do. But once, most of the manufacturers that we've dealt with, we tell them this is what we need. It's very easy to get that information. So Canada in the last 2 years has implemented import license. So that import license is governed by what's called the Safe Food for Canadians Act. So this is a way of licensing importers. And unlike the FDA, it's actually the importer that's responsible for the various factories that they import from. So this is a very important part of the whole selling to Canada. As a licensed importer, if there is a problem with a product, the CFIA comes to you, and if it's not rectified, actually the importer will lose the license, not just for that specific manufacturer, but for all manufacturers. So it's a very important guideline that importers follow, and I think it's an important one. I mean, food safety is so important now, especially because we're getting food from all over the world, and CFIA can't possibly be in all factories at one time. So it's understandable why they want to have this sort of like a safety net for themselves and for Canadians in general to eat foods and make sure that they don't get sick from it. So as part of the import license, we also have to provide a traceable way of finding the specific lot or specific expiry date that we can pull off the shelf so that not more people can get sick. Being the importer on record, we are also accountable. So as I mentioned that, right now, before the license, importers were responsible, but now with the license, it makes it even more responsible, makes us more responsible, because if we lose our license, we can't continue doing business. And so we are very happy with Thai suppliers, because they are able to provide what we need. And here's just some things that we do need to be able to bring in products from a Thai manufacturer. So we don't need to produce this every time we import from any manufacturer, but it's expected that we have this on file always in case there's a request for it. So the product spec, product analysis, ingredient list, and some of the other ones that you see on there. On the next few slides, we'll show, some difference between the labeling of Canadian and USA regulation. The food license is to be able to adhere to the food license. HACCP, BRC, ISO is not a requisite yet. But for many retailers that you might want to sell to, those are already minimum requirements. So I think most Thai manufacturers, they already have HACCP, ISO, GMP. So the one that's more difficult to get would be the GFSI or the BRC. But in order to sell to some mainstream retailers, you would need those GFSI or BRC certificates. It's just a random product that I pulled from online. So the top one is a US package. The bottom is a Canadian one. So you can see right away that the Canadian one looks a lot busier, right? Because we have to include English and French. English and French are actually the official languages of Canada. So everyone is supposed to be able to speak both. But I think very little of us speak both fluently. Yeah, it just depends on what region we live in. Although it doesn't look as good, I think there's still a lot of information there. There's some allergen differences, right? So the one that comes top of mind for me is, for Canada, we have to declare mustard seeds, whereas USA doesn't need to declare mustard seeds. We've highlighted the nutrition fact table there. So for Canada, we have a specific format, even down to the font size, the size of the lines. There are some nutrient differences that we're looking at, right? Like, vitamin D is for the US, but we don't need vitamin D for Canada. And also, again, English and French. So these differences are important, especially if we want to sell the products Canada-wide. Some companies have gotten away with, just sticking on a sticker, which I guess if you're only selling in certain parts of the market, it could pass. But again, if you want to sell it to, the other third of the country, which is Quebec and East, you would need to have a fully bilingual, non-stickered packaging. So there's actually such thing as a language police in Quebec. And this is not a joke. It's a language police that will go to various stores and say, hey, your label is not compliant. Please change it, right? And they'll give you a warning. It's not so hard. Like, they take it off the shelf, but they'll give you a warning. And if you don't do it, they will take you off the shelf. So and again, it's the multiculturalism, right? It's, French people are very proud of their heritage, and as they should be. And for that province and that region, it's the prominent language. So they would expect that the labeling is readable by everyone there. tariffs. Yeah. So, I've been in the business for a while, and Thailand has always been known as having the best value proposition, right? So by value, I don't mean the cheapest, but I do mean the best price for the best quality. And, most consumers would look for that. With Thailand evolving and becoming less of a developing nation compared to your neighbors. I think that, costs of labor and even costs of raw material and whatnot have gone up to change that perception because, as again, compared to your neighbors, the products, aside from tariffs, the products coming out of your neighboring countries are cheaper, but not necessarily the best value, right? But they are cheaper. And so there is a segment of the market that just really looks at the price. And unfortunately, again, as the world sees Thailand as getting out of that developing country status, I think though the tariffs even make the competitiveness worse. So I think, I have some examples there. Rice from everywhere is 0%. Vietnam and Philippines are Thailand's biggest competitors at this time for certain categories. So, coconut milk, which is a huge export from Thailand, has a 6% disadvantage. Even though the quality is better from Vietnam and the Philippines, but you add to the cost of production and then you add the tariffs, then that makes the value proposition less, right? Because it's more expensive. But the quality noodles, so noodles from Vietnam, Vietnam, I think, enjoys almost 0% duty on most of the food categories. So these are important things to determine when considering if and what items to sell to Canada. Unfortunately, as for us in the commercial side, these are out of our control, the tariffs, right? And these are government talks that hopefully do lead to better business environment. And I was recently told that I think Thailand will be joining the ASEAN talks for free trade with Canada starting in September. So that's a very good piece of news for us doing business. So, and I just want to clarify, I don't think Thailand will ever have an advantage over Vietnam and Philippines. I just think that the most we can ask is not to be at a disadvantage, right? So I don't think we'll ever be at an advantage. It's just all we ask is don't out of the start, don't already be at a disadvantage. So hopefully the talks do go somewhere with the free trade, and in the next couple of years we can see some better competitiveness for some of Thailand's key categories. So summary for this part, we do have unique requirements. Sometimes the labeling is a hurdle for manufacturers, right? They have to produce a Canadian compliant label but the volume might not be as high as the US. And so sometimes that is an issue. But I always say that, the cost of the unsold labels can be borne by your partners, right? Nobody has to take that risk all alone. And, that's another part about finding a good partner where they would understand the difficulties of doing labels just for Canada when we can't commit to a certain volume. Tariffs, again, make an impact on competitiveness. And so please research the HS code to make sure, what category that falls under. I don't know if I can say this because it's being recorded, but I think many people do this. Your products might fall into different HS codes. So it's good to get advice on which HS code you could use to possibly find a better tariff, right? But we're not saying to do anything illegal. We're just saying to do something that, it's defined as such, and your category does fall under that. But for the importer, I think the government can come back 7 years and look back onto your tariff records and charge you back with interest if you misdeclare. So it's a very fine line between finding an alternative and outright lying. And again, determine if the labeling and the documentation that needs to be done makes fiscal sense for yourselves, right? And if not, then what are the alternatives that we can find? I'm sorry, how are we doing for time? I don't have a counter here. Are we okay? Okay, good. So the next part here, I think, is the most abstract. And by abstract, I think I mean that it just keeps changing, right? Because nothing is stable during these terrible times. Things just keep changing because of the impact from the virus, and what we thought was the trend going pre-pandemic may or may not be the trend during the pandemic. And then how does that translate to post-pandemic? And so I have some points here, so hopefully we can make some sense out of it. But again, I just want to go back to the map of Canada and how we have almost 3 different regions, because our country is so wide. Each impact of COVID has affected each region differently. And so the trends for the country, I'm not sure we can say it so generally. It would need to be by region, but we'll try to do our best to give everyone a better sense of where the trends will be coming from in general. So pre-COVID, and I think from our research, it's actually very similar to other parts of the world. Sustainable packaging, right? So environment is very important for everyone, because we all live on this earth, and we want to make sure that future generations have a good earth to inherit. And so we should be doing what we can now. And I think a lot of the millennials and the generation younger than them are looking at more sustainable packaging. And I have to say again, Thailand, from some of the manufacturers that I've been speaking to, have done a good job in terms of trying to find alternatives. Locally sourced, so a little bit conflicting to what we're discussing here, but it is a trend for us in Canada, and I think actually North America. So locally sourced means that a lot of the consumers want to support the farmers or the businesses that manufacture here, and especially so during COVID, right? So sorry to change the topic, but we were talking about pre-COVID, but even pre-COVID, people were trying to help out the community, because if the community is good, then you should be good. And that's been a very big push for supporting local businesses. Locally sourced, and I'm talking about produce, which the picture shows, should have better freshness, right? The consumers can trust that most likely the farmers aren't using any illegal substances, right? And you can trust that the crops are being grown in a good way. Next one is organic, and I'm just going to tie that into natural ingredients. So organic and natural, all health related. As the population ages, everyone wants to be healthy, and even for young people, I think younger people are more educated in terms of what is good for their body and what's not good for their body. So they're looking for ingredients that are deemed healthy. So same thing for vegetarian and vegan, right? Not only is a vegetarian vegan healthy for the environment, because the meat produced or the animals being slaughtered would be less, and the carbon footprint would be less, but I think it's also a health angle. Meats, unfortunately, most meats, eating too much is probably not as good for your health. So last but not least, feel good stories. So I have to say that Thailand does so many good things. Like when I go there and when I talk to manufacturers, a lot of the leading companies there, they do a lot for charity, they do a lot for the environment, but they don't really speak about it. I think before they didn't really speak about it. Now it's a little bit better. That leaves them very vulnerable to this new culture of being guilty first and then proven innocent. So, some article somewhere or some social media blogger will say, some celebrity is not good. And then everyone just jumps on the wagon, but the celebrity doesn't have the opportunity to explain why. And it's very similar, I think, for for Thailand and the manufacturers. You guys do such good things, but because culture-wise, it's not in the Asian culture to try to say, oh, look at me, I do this well, and I do this good, I'm supporting this, right? But I think in the times like these where news travels so fast, and if you don't keep telling people the good stuff you're doing, you're leaving yourself vulnerable for when that one thing you may have done wrong, and it's not proven, but someone's just spread that out. It leaves you very vulnerable to that type of that type of issue, right? I don't want to bring up any specific examples, but I do know that Thailand has been hit with a few of those bad PR things. And so, feel-good stories not only help sell the brand, not only help sell the products, but they also act as an insurance once your brand gets big that, it's not that easy to change the consumer's perception about you. So this slide, I'm going to talk about spending during pandemic. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think whatever trends happen during the pandemic will be temporary, unless they are consistent or in line with the trends that we just talked about in the previous slides, which were pre-pandemic. So let's step through each one. So when I look at the first one, they spent less on big desserts, prep ingredients, and hot, ready-to-eat meals. I think that falls in line with the trend of the natural ingredients, because those items there are not, they probably don't use as many natural ingredients, and they use some preservatives and whatnot. So I think that's a trend that will stay post-pandemic. They spent more on meat alternatives during this COVID time, which makes sense because from the trends from the previous slides, we see that people are going more vegetarian, more vegan. Same as the next one, spent more on plant-based milks and non-dairy products, again, vegan. So those trends, and the next one is spent more on fresh produce, which might go with the sourced locally or some of, sourced locally or organic or natural ingredients, let's say. So those trends, I think, are in line with the trajectory of the trends pre-pandemic. But the next few ones, like prep dinner from scratch and cook from home more than the previous years, I think those during the pandemic was good because many people were home. We couldn't go to work, right? And if we keep by the same assumption that trends that are happening during COVID only, those are probably temporary ones. So that leads us to more questions about where the trends will continue. So now working from home, we just got out of our various parts of the country just got out of stage 3, which means that, more people are vaccinated. And I think more people are continuing to go home, going to the office for work. I don't think that companies are as productive right now as pre-pandemic with people working from home, even though, when I speak to companies that have people working from home, they say productivity is down. But when I speak to people that are actually working from home, they say that I'm busier than ever. So I think there's some conflict there on what angle you're looking at it. But I think that, from a company perspective, working from home, they might be able to work more from home than pre-pandemic, but I think most people will be going back to the office once everything's done, right? Right now, we don't know when the pandemic will end, but when the pandemic ends, more people will be going back to the office. Hence, the home cooking, I think, will probably taper off. Besides the time to home cook, I think people are running out of ideas. I mean, we've been so used to having different things to eat and trying out different recipes. I think a lot of people are having difficulty finding new recipes to interest their families or themselves to eat, and so that might also taper off post-pandemic, right? Inflated goods. So being in the business part, I'm sure everyone has heard about the freight situation. not affecting just food, not just affecting Thailand, but I think affecting the whole world. It's a really ridiculous situation where the cost of the freight is actually more expensive than the cost of the products. And I think we've already come to that point. Because we're stationed in Toronto, I'm just talking about Toronto. I think it's a little better to ship out to the West Coast, but it's still ridiculously high. That's going to smooth out sooner or later. I hope sooner, but I have a feeling that, once the freight rates come back down, I think though the economy might not have recovered. And so people in Canada have received a very generous subsidy from the government. And the good thing is that they've been saving that money. But because bad times are ahead, most people will be saving that money and still looking for cheaper items. So as a guide, I would think that, you can't be in the middle. People have money, but they want to save because they know the rainy days are coming. So they're going to try to, cut down on their food costs, let's say. But then because of their money, you can't keep that habit for that long. And so when they splurge, they're going to spend. So don't be in the middle. You have to either be innovative and position yourself high. I mean, you don't need to be shy about positioning yourself high if there's a reason to do so, or position yourself low. But don't come in and say, I'm not sure what I am, but let's do it this way. I think those are the products that might not have the result that you would be looking for. So again, we'll go back to online grocery shopping. So I just have some stats here that I couldn't fit onto the presentation, but about a quarter of people have tried ordering from this survey to order online, but only a quarter of that quarter were satisfied with what they got. So a quarter of the quarter, so 75% of that quarter have gone back to brick and mortar shopping. And only is because of either maybe it's the customer service, maybe it's the delivery time, maybe it's the quality of the food. I'm not sure. But there seems to be a disconnect still between what the consumers are getting versus what they were expecting. And that's why the online grocery trend hasn't really taken off like this, but it's still slowly, and actually it's probably plateaued more than we'd like. So yeah, the report was from Deloitte and Touche Canada, and the biggest question from them is what will stick after. So again, I think the summary would be that whatever the pre-pandemic trend was, we can probably guess that it's going to stay, but anything that happened during COVID might really just be temporary. Okay, so I think we're almost near the end. This is my, I think, second last slide. So just to summarize everything again, all the information that we've given you, and I think the reason why, again, I'm very honored that the DITP has invited me for this opportunity to present this, is because, these are things that we've done. It's not just theory, right? But because the market situation changes, it's not a manual that you can just follow A, B, C, D. It's more of a guideline. But the population is increasing in Canada. The retailers are sophisticated, right? There's different types of retailers that you can use to target your target demographic. Please ensure that you do understand the regulations when it comes to tariffs or when it comes to labeling and whatnot. You still have to be in brick and mortar. Best strategy, if you're not familiar with it, is to work with a partner. And why I keep saying that the investment risk is less than the US is because when you get into Costco USA, let's just say for instance, you might have to produce a big shipment to satisfy that initial shipment. But if you get into Costco Canada, well, it's maybe only 80 stores. And so you don't have to create all that capacity just in case Costco USA orders from you, or Walmart USA orders from you. So in Walmart Canada, the orders are smaller, so you can start it off step by step, and you don't have to take as big of a risk, and you don't have to invest as much in listing fees or whatnot to get in. So it's a good test to see whether or not your products work for the North American market. Although Canada consumers are not 100% equal to the USA consumers, I think it's a good indication population for you to try. So, and of course I have to give a plug for the company. So we are located in Markham, Ontario. We service customers all across Canada, and our contact information is there. So thank you once again to everyone, especially the DITP, for having me here, and it's a pleasure to speak to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your valuable insight in Toronto with the topic Canada is a gateway to North America. And for now, I would say our question is all answered by our Toronto's officer already.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And is there any question for this session from our attendees? มีใครอยากถามคำถามเพิ่มไหมคะค่ะถ้าตอนนี้ยังไม่มีนะคะหรือภายหลังท่านนึกคำถามออกหรืออยากสอบถามสำนักงานโดยตรงสามารถที่จะสอบถามผ่านทางอีเมลได้นะคะตอนนี้เจ้าหน้าที่ของเราพิมพ์อีเมลของสำนักงานไทยเทรดเซ็นเตอร์ที่โตรอนโตไว้ให้ในช่องแชทเรียบร้อยแล้วนะคะท่านสามารถพิมพ์ไปได้ที่อีเมล toronto@thaitrade.ca นะคะสำหรับคำถามอื่นๆที่ทางสคต.โตรอนโตได้ตอบไปแล้วตรงนี้เราก็ขออนุญาตไม่รีวิวแล้วกันนะคะเนื่องจากเวลาเราค่อนข้างกระชั้นชิดค่ะในเซสชันนี้เราใช้เวลากันคุ้มค่ากันเลยทีเดียวค่ะกับทางวิทยากรของเราและตอนนี้ไม่มีคำถามใดเพิ่มเติมแล้วค่ะดิฉันขออนุญาตปิดการสัมมนาในหัวข้อนี้แต่เพียงเท่านี้นะคะส่วนท่านใดต้องการดูวิดีโอในหัวข้อนี้ย้อนหลังหรือหัวข้ออื่นๆที่เราได้ถ่ายทอดไปแล้วนะคะสามารถติดตามได้ที่ Facebook Fanpage DITP Overseas หรือทาง YouTube DITP Overseas นะคะตามลิงก์ที่เราส่งให้ในแชทได้เลยค่ะและขอความร่วมมือทุกท่านค่ะก่อนออกจากระบบกรุณาตอบแบบประเมินความพึงพอใจเพื่อทางกรมจะได้นำความเห็นของท่านนะคะมาพัฒนาการดำเนินกิจกรรมต่อๆไปของเราให้ดียิ่งขึ้นนะคะส่วนท่านใดต้องการเข้าร่วมกิจกรรมต่อยอดการค้ายังสามารถสมัครเข้าร่วมกิจกรรมนี้ได้อยู่นะคะชื่อกิจกรรม DITP Overseas OBM จับคู่ค้าธุรกิจเปิดตลาดใหม่ขยายตลาดเดิมด้วยรูปแบบออนไลน์ค่ะระหว่างวันที่ 7-8 กันยายนพุทธศักราช 2564 ซึ่งเป็นกิจกรรมที่เราจัดขึ้นโดยความร่วมมือกับสำนักงานส่งเสริมการค้าในต่างประเทศจากภูมิภาคอเมริกาลาตินอเมริกาภูมิภาคยุโรปและ CIS ภูมิภาคแอฟริกาและตะวันออกกลางค่ะท่านผู้ประกอบการสามารถสมัครเข้าร่วมกิจกรรมนี้ได้ถึงวันที่ 20 สิงหาคมศกนี้นะคะและสมัครได้ผ่านทาง www.ditpoverseas.com ค่ะในหัวข้อถัดไปเราจะเริ่มขึ้นในอีกประมาณ 15-20 นาทีนี้นะคะหัวข้อมีชื่อว่า Mexico an attractive market for food industry และในช่วงบ่ายของเราวันนี้ค่ะเรายังอยู่ด้วยกันกับอีก2หัวข้อคือหัวข้อ Africa Land of Opportunity Tips and Tricks You Need to Know และหัวข้อสุดท้ายของเราในวันนี้ค่ะช่องทางการส่งออกสินค้าอาหารไทยไปยังแอฟริกาใต้And for now, on behalf of the ITP, I would like to thank to Mr. Takounseun, the Vice President from TI Foods, for the discussion. Canada is a gateway to North America. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Thank you.